So, hello everybody, my name is Aurelio De Rosa and I want to welcome you to improve the style and quality of your project automatically. Before I start, I want to spend a very few words about me. I'm a web developer living and working in London for a company called Digital Detox. I've contributed and still contribute to a lot of open source projects like jQuery, where I'm one of the members of the team. Can I use GitHub.js, Pure CSS, and many others. I've also loved to share my knowledge writing articles for several well-known networks and magazines like SitePoint, AtPlus, Net Magazine, PHP Architect, and many others. And finally, I'm the author of these two books about jQuery, jQuery in Action 3rd edition, and Instant jQuery Selectors. So, for those of you who aren't sleeping yet, let's start with this presentation. So, as developer, we focus on two main goals. The first one is to create value for the company we work for. The second one is to write good code. Now, the first one is probably the most obvious. A company's ultimate goal is to generate money. Money that but many developers, believe it or not, don't realize that. Many developers are so focused on other tasks or on themselves that they forget the true reason behind their salary. And this reason is that they have to build a software that must generate revenue in a way or the other. There are many ways in which a company can generate revenues. The company might sell the software, the company can sell services, but regardless of that, the software that you build must generate revenue. Because without money, there are no salaries to pay and not product to build, which means that pretty much everyone in this room will be jobless. The second goal is what's really close to a developer's heart, which is writing performant, testable, documented, well-written, clean, readable code. Or at least as developers, we should strive for that. Writing good code, as the experience has taught us, is very beneficial, not only just for us to advance in our career, but also for the software itself, and eventually for the company. Well, the truth is that there are companies working maybe on certain projects that can easily hide poor quality code under the carpet, or to better say, behind a nice user interface, and still be very successful from the business perspective, which is probably what really matter in that industry. In this talk, I will focus on those companies and developers that actually want to write and ship software made of good quality code. So I will just forget about developers that don't care about good quality code. And to do that, I will introduce you to tools that perform several checks on different areas. And these areas will focus on front-end technologies. So unless your job is to write code for very small projects, chances there are that you're working in a team. And the point I want to stress you is that a team is not a group of single developers. A team is made by people with different backgrounds, different skill, experience, preferences, code style, code indentation. But this doesn't mean that chaos is allowed. So while this is, or at least should be, totally allowed in your company, so you are totally allowed to dress any way you want, to act pretty much the way you want, to be the person you are, the person you want to be, this instead is not allowed. So ideally, these are 3 snippets of code taken from the same code base. Now, regardless of what the actual snippets do, the point is that, as you can see, they're quite different in the code style they use. For examples, let's highlight some differences. They use different code indentation, they have different naming conventions. One of the snippets had a very inefficient use of jQuery, so the code quality wasn't that good. The spacing were really different. Then there were mixed use of single and double quotes, a lot of inconsistencies. Now, at first glance, that might not seem a severe issue to you, but I can guarantee that it is. And I'm going to explain you why. So, first of all, a code base that is made of these, if not even more, code style conventions is hard to follow and to maintain. And this is especially more true for developers that have to jump into a project at a later phase. Because let's say that a developer has to fix some issues, maybe the developer has to write new features. Before doing that, the developer has to understand all the code style, all the code conventions, or each single developer in the project, and then the developer can really fix the issues and write new features. And this can really slow down the process. So you don't want that, because it's really a waste of time and waste of money. So in such circumstances, what I advise people is to adhere to what I call the Musketeers principle. So as you probably know, the Musketeers motto was all for one and one for all. I like to reinterpret this motto in our industry, saying that a developer is one element of a team and should collaborate with others to achieve the common goal, which, as I explained before, the common goal is to build software made of good code, but even more importantly, that makes money. But the team as a whole should act as the team itself was made of only one developer. What that means is that the code quality should not differ a lot. And even more, the code style should be absolutely the same, because in that case, a developer jumping into the project can learn one code style, one code convention, and be able to change and to update the code in every single part, which is really convenient, it's really fast. You learn once and then you can start, instead of learning maybe 10 different conventions, and maybe you introduce even your own new convention, which is even harder to maintain and follow. So a first idea to fix this problem is that someone, usually the lead developer, might take the responsibility to go over the room and talk with each developer, review every line of code of every single developer. But as you can really understand, this is really impractical. It will be very boring and will be frustrating, and actually there is no time to read every line of code of every single developer. So there is no point in that. A better idea is to delegate all these checks, or at least as many checks as possible, to tools. Usually people use tools for a lot of things nowadays, to build, to deploy, magnification, optimizations, whatever. Because by automating all the checks, you can really save your time, the time of your team, and improve the overall quality and code style of a code base. So it becomes a lot easier to adhere to what I've called, what I've described before as the Musketeers principle. So if you work in any modern company, I hope for you that you are using at least one of the tools mentioned here, one between Grand, Gulp, and Broccoli. Now, regardless, you can even not use one of these three. You can use your own build tool, another build tool. You can even use just NPM. That's not the point. The point is that you should use a tool to automate as much as possible. Now, in this talk, in this presentation, I will focus on Grand because it's what I use, and on some Grand plugins to help you improving the code quality and code style of your code base. But I guarantee you that you will find relevant plugins for all the other tools that you might want to use or that you are using, like Gulp. So let the automation begin. So let's start mentioning these tools. So if you read the description of this presentation, you know that I will focus mainly, as I said, on front-end technologies. So I guess that if you're in this room, you're a front-end developer, so you love and you mainly write HTML code, CSS, JavaScript. In this presentation, I will describe tasks that deal with these three languages and just a bit more. And one important feature of these tasks that I will present you today is that not only these tasks are able to detect issues, problematic code, different code style conventions, but they are often even able to fix everything for you. So not only you know where the issues are, but even you don't even have to care about them because the tool will fix them for you. So let's start with the base of the web, which is HTML. So HTML is what is really, for me, is really the base of the web, and as you know, is how we use, what we use to write content. And as you know, the content is king on the web because it's really what has led the web so far. So the content allows us to write information that we can share across the world in a very fast way. And so it's very important to write semantic and correct markup. And this is very important for SEO, accessibility, and many, many other reasons. So for me, the web really doesn't deserve or even need invalid HTML. But the problem, as I said, is that a team is made of developers with a lot of different skills, of different capabilities. So there might be junior developers that don't know HTML, or even other languages, enough to not writing problematic code, invalid markup. And also, we are human beings, and as human beings, we are imperfect. So an error might always happen. Another use case is that maybe you are developing a specific component, and at the time, all the components are tied together to create a page. So everyone has written valid code, but when you build the page together, then is where the generated code is not valid anymore. So, for example, these are three small, very small examples of code, invalid code that can be generated. So, what these snippets have in common? Well, they have in common the fact that they are all invalid. So you can just paste them in the HTML validator and you will see that they are all invalid. The actual error messages are not important in this context, but the point is that this is what can really happen in a real world project. So how to fix that? Well, the first task I want to present you is GrandHTML. GrandHTML is a plugin that lets you spot HTML invalid code in your code base. Is very easy to use, it's very easy to install and to configure. So this is how you install it. Probably most of you are aware of npm, which is, if you are not, is the package manager for Node.js, which if you are a front-end developer, I guess you are aware of. And you can install it with just this line, npm install GrandHTML. And these, as pretty much all the tasks that I will present to you today, are very easy to configure. They usually require just one line of code and you are done. So what I'm asking here is that I want to parse all the HTML pages that are inside a pages and a demo folders. That's all. So you have your HTML pages, you have the tool that parses these pages for you, and this is the outcome that you will obtain. Regardless of the fact that there is a dark background and a white foreground color, the errors messages are exactly the same that you will obtain by manually copying and pasting all the source code of all the pages of your website into the usual online HTML validator. But of course, copy and pasting all the source code will be very boring, will be time consuming. So in very few seconds, you can detect all the issues, all the HTML issues of your code base. Now, once we have dealt with the issues of HTML, it's time to move to the next layer, which is CSS. Now, CSS is coming more powerful year after year, and basically we are moving from website like this one, or at least we have moved from website like this one, which is pretty old, to amazing CSS pieces of art like this one. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this, but this is a page that I can guarantee is huge. Probably just the right top left corner will fit into the usual screen. It is very huge. This is all made with just HTML and CSS, nothing more than that. There are no images in this web page. It's really stunning, it's incredible. If you want to learn a few tricks, check it out. So the point is that as the complexity of CSS is increasing, there are even more ways that you can make mistakes. Because there are new properties, you might even have a simple typo. So really, a mistake can be pretty much everything. The good news is that you can detect all these issues. And this is, so just to have a taste of what can go wrong, let's take a look very quickly at this snippet of code. So, what's wrong with this code? Well, pretty much everything. Not because the code was wrong on itself. If you use HTML elements that have maybe the class that I've showed, everything will work fine. Because in CSS, most of the code that you can write will still be perfectly valid, will still do something. But the point is that even if it does something, that doesn't mean that the code is good. So, as I said, many of the parts that I show you aren't slick error, but can definitely be improved. So how we can improve that, how we can even detect them. Because, of course, detecting the issues in 20 lines of code is easy. Will take you 5 minutes, 3 minutes, depends on your skills. Junior developers might not even spot a lot of those issues. But if you have a tool that in maybe 3 seconds can parse thousands and thousands of lines of CSS code, that's much, much better. So I want to introduce you to GrandContrib CSS lint, which, well, you can read the definition, whatever, but anyway, the point is that it parses your CSS files and detects problematic code. And the point is that it is based on rules, a lot of rules actually, that you can tweak to fit your needs. Because when it comes to code style, there is not a correct way and an incorrect way. It's all about taste. It's all about agreement within the team. So for example, if I show you this code again, here, padding has 4 values defined, where I use 0 with pixel. As you know, a value of 0, doesn't matter what unit you are using, pixels, EM, RAM, is everything the same. And also, since I'm using the same value, I could have just defined it 0. So this is not strictly speaking an error, but is a slightly a code smell. So this is a taste of the rules available for this task. For example, you might want to detect the use of the important declaration in your code. That usually it might be a code smell, might be not. It depends on your use cases. For example, if your code has a joining class, for example, as .myClass, .some other class. First of all, as you might remember, this is not supported in very older browsers, and also usually you don't really want to use it because it increases specificity. Then there are problems that you might want to detect with box sizing or maybe CSS declaration that do nothing, like empty rules. Anyway, I don't want to bother you with all the rest of the rules. You can read them, but that's just to give you a taste. So once again, it's very easy to install. npm install grandcontrib CSS lint, and you are done. You are set up. And this is pretty much this is not even a basic configuration. What I'm showing you, all you need, all the mandatory property is just this one, where I'm saying are the files that I want the tool to parse and to receive errors. All the other things, the options here are completely as you can imagine, optional. And here I'm defining, for example, that I don't care about the important declaration. I don't care if my code has a joining class. And that's where I said you can tweak those rules. Because what you can do is to say, I'm fine with having something, so I want the tools to ignore certain rules. I want the tool to give me just a warning in case I find some problematic code. Or for me, something is so important that I want my build process to completely block itself in case there is one rule break. So you can tweak this, and as you can imagine, since there are a lot of rules in the gram file, you can write a lot of options. But this means that your code will become larger, and probably you don't want that. So you can externalize all the properties that you want to tweak in an external file called CSS lint rc, and which, by the way, uses the JSON format, or you can just rely on the default configuration. So this is a very quick example of the output. So it gives you a bunch of warning errors or nothing if you are ignoring the rules. So while linting CSS might work for very small projects or just to have a taste of the code that will eventually go in production, the truth is that pretty much no one nowadays is writing CSS anymore. No one is writing just raw CSS. Pretty much any modern company is using a preprocessor that eventually will create the CSS code. So regardless of you're using maybe Sass, you're using less, Stylus, I don't know. I usually prefer to use Sass, and as far as I know, Sass has pretty much 70–80% of the market. So I will talk in this presentation about Sass, and even more, Sass has 2 syntaxes, and I will focus on the most used syntax, which is SCSS. So, as I said, no one is writing just CSS anymore. And since SCSS and Sass has more features than CSS has, like as functions, mixing, placeholders, you can write for loops, conditional statement, there are even more ways in which your code can go wrong, in which the code style can diverge. For example, this is a quick example of a Sass file. I guess that you might recognize a few issues here. Just give you 3–4 seconds. So these Sass files generate this CSS code, which once again is completely valid because it's really hard to write some CSS that does nothing. But the point is that there are a lot of inconsistencies in that code. For example, I've defined colors in different way. In one case, I've created a variable. In another case, I've just written the color. Maybe the color were defined a different way. For example, the first one, the white, was defined as a complete hex string, which is made of 6 characters, the other one of 3 characters. Then the variable was defined with all uppercase letters, which, as you know, is a convention usually used for constants, not variables. There were a mixed use of indentation, single and double quotes, and many, many other things. So I want to introduce you to this tool, which is GrandJes lint, that deals with finding issues in SAS files and using the SCSS syntax. And these are the rules available. The cool thing about this tool is that it is not just a matter of code convention. It can detect also naming conventions and a bit more. For example, let's say that you're using BEM as a methodology to write your classes your class names. You can even say that you don't want the BEM nesting to go too deep because it's harder to follow, to maintain. So you can check these kind of errors. Maybe you want to check again the important rule, that there are no debugment statement inside the code, and many, many other things. So once again, this is how you install it. The configuration is very simple. And since there are a lot of rules, I advise you from the beginning to use an external file in which put your rules. The only thing I want to highlight is that it uses the YAML format, not the JSON format. So I know it's not that great, but this is what it uses. And this is the outcome that you will obtain, which spawns quite a few issues. So far, we have spoken about CSS, SAS, and mostly about easy stuff. Indentation, naming conventions, stuff that is not crazy. It is a lot better for the reason I explained at the beginning to fix, but they are not incredibly crucial. But when it comes to JavaScript, it is really crucial to use tools because JavaScript is a real programming language. So there are a lot of things that can go wrong, and there are a lot of concepts that you don't have in HTML, like time complexity, space complexity, cyclomatic complexity, unit testing. So it's really, really important to detect code smells at an early stage. So before we delve into code quality, because there are tools for code quality, let's just talk a bit about code style. So the point is that JavaScript, since it is a language, there are more ways in which the code can diverge. For example, while in SAS you have functions, but you have named functions. There are no objects, there are no property. It's easy to detect some issues. In JavaScript, it's more complex because let's talk about function. A function can be named or unnamed, can be inline, assigned to a property, to an object, to a variable. So there are a lot of ways in which even just one feature can diverge in the code and in the way it is used among the team. So you want to detect code that can be improved. And for such goal, you can use GrandJes CS. It is just a wrapper around a tool called JSES, which is JavaScript code style. Well, it is well used by a lot of very important companies and teams and foundations out there. jQuery is using it, Adobe, Bootstrap, Wikimedia Foundation, and many, many others. It is unbelievable because it supports more than 150 rules, options, however you like to call them. It supports ECMAScript 2015. I guess that probably very, very soon it will support even ECMAScript 2016 or ECMAScript 7, as some people know it. JSX, Flow, and much, much more. And the cool thing is that the team works constantly to add even more rules. So this is just an example of the rules. For example, you may want to say that in case you know about ECMAScript 6, you don't want to use the arrow function in your code, or maybe that in case it is possible, required to use the dot notation to access the property of an object. So for example, obj dot something instead of the square bracket operator. You want to require the semicolon at the end of each statement. Well, these kind of rules, and this is just for code style. But you can really tweak the code style and the code, the configuration of this file, and you will have an unbelievably homogeneous code style among the team. So these are my favorite features, and this is probably these three will convince you to use this tool. So first of all, it will come with preset configuration. So that means that, as I said, it has more than 150 rules. So But writing a specific configuration that fits your project might be really time consuming. And also, unless you want to disappoint the developers in your team, you want to ask for each rule to each of your developer what is his or her opinion. And this can be really time consuming. This can really go crazy. So you probably don't want to do that. And in case you don't want to do that, you can rely on preset configurations. There are pretty much 8 to 10 preset configurations. One is what we use in the jQuery projects that you can just put into your project and rely on them. You will have probably not your best configuration in the sense that you will not agree on some conventions. But anyway, your team, the code base of the whole project will be the same, which is very important. Then, in case you really want to spend some time tweaking a given configuration, there is a tool in JSES that even allows you to start from a preset configuration and then tweak it based on your code. So what it does is that it parses your code and tells you which is the configuration that is closer to your code style, or at least to the most used code style conventions in your code. Once you have selected a given preset configuration, it tells you maybe the preset configuration has 3 spaces for indentation, but I'm detecting that your code mostly uses 4 spaces. Which one you want to use? So you can go through this process and have a very, well, in a pretty decent amount of time, you will have your own custom configuration. Finally, what this means is that the code base will have very few issues because you have really tweaked it to what's the state of the art of your code base. And for those issues that are still left, the tool can fix most of them for you. So for example, if some developers in your project are using 3 spaces, and you said that developers should use 4 spaces, or maybe that they have to put, let's say, a space before the assignment operator, the equal, before and after, you can have the tool automatically fix these issues for you. So the point is that it doesn't fix all the issues for you. For example, let's say that you want all comments to start with an uppercase letter. If the comments start with the lowercase letter, there is nothing the tool can do. In English, probably it could do something, but not in every language. So they decide to not do anything. In that case, it's up to you. This is how you install it, and this is pretty much how you configure it. So once again, I'm using an external configuration file. And here, the fix property says, please, fix all the issues that you can for me, because I don't want to be bothered by these small changes. The highlight I want to make is that this file uses JSON configuration file, so this is cool as well. So for example, this is one of the code that you might have. You might not agree on some conventions. And if you don't agree, it's exactly one reason to use this tool, because then you and your team agree on one code style and you stick with it. So for example, this is the output that it gives you. For example, I've mixed single and double quotes, I've missed 1 semicolon, and all the other things. Finally, I want to talk just a bit about code quality in JavaScript, which is probably the most important thing, because code quality is really what makes a difference in production for a user. The code style, the code convention is for you as a developer, as a maintainer of a code base. But for users, what really matter is the code. Maybe that the code is performant and other things. But the code that I'm talking about is about code quality in the sense of not how performant it is, but how easily it is to maybe rewrite it, refactor it, how complex is a function, which at the end will lead you to write very good code that is also performant for the user. And when it comes to code quality, it's always, well, not always, but often it's a matter of deciding what's good, what's bad, and it really depends on the skills of the developer that is judging the code. And so probably you want to use a tool to use some worldwide well-known conventions for that, and one of the tasks that you can use is grant country JS hint, which behind the scene use JS hint. This is very well known. The word pretty much is used by Yahoo, Mozilla, jQuery, and a lot of other companies and foundation. It can support several issues, but as I said, not everything. So if the code is not as performant as you want, or maybe the code itself is not working as you expect, that's a different story. Then you have to write unit tests, functional testing. That's another story, and that's up to you. The tool can detect other code smells. My advice is that don't overestimate your code, because developers are really proud of the code they write, so they think they're always the best developers ever, just to go back 6 months later and say, oh, who wrote this code? Then were you? And this is especially more true in the light of these statistics. So only 50% of the software linted.js hint.com passed all the checks. All the other, which means all 85%, had issues. Maybe someone more than others, but had some issues, something that you might want to review later on. So these are the options that are available. So for example, for you, a code smell is the bitwise operator, if someone is using just a bitwise operator, or for example, if someone in your code base, in your team, or even yourself, is not using the strict comparison in JavaScript, that might be a good smell. You want usually to enforce that. If you're using maybe, I don't know, globals variable, or maybe you're using a variable before it is defined, these are all tweaks that you can, all rules that you can review. And these are my favorite rules, my favorite options. So max complexity is a value that tells you how complex is your code in regard of the cyclomatic complexity. I don't know how many of you know what the cyclomatic complexity is, but basically it's a metric that tells you how hard is your code to deal with. And when you have a very low value, it means that probably your code is adhering to the single responsibility principle, which is a principle that I hope you're following. If the code complexity value is really high, it means that your code, your function, maybe is doing too many things. And then maybe you have to go back, refactor, split the function, write more functions. This is really good smell. In this case, you're really improving your code quality. Even if the user probably will never say thank you to you, your colleagues will do. So this is one of my favorite features. Another one is that you can use Macstep. So for example, I think that in your experience, maybe at the beginning of your career, maybe if you're mentoring someone, you have seen the developer go really crazy, like for, if. Like there is even a joke, like an image on the internet where there is Ryu doing the Hadouken, where there is basically a PHP code that has 15 levels of nesting or something like that. Well, of course, you can easily understand that 15 levels of nesting is crazy. It is not maintainable, it's not readable at all, it's doing too much. You want to refactor that code. So Macstep allows you to detect these kind of issues. So I can say, I want, as a Macstep tree, so I want an if inside a for, inside a for. And that's my best. Everything that is deeper than that is wrong, and you have to refactor it. Of course, I mean, if you're an experienced developer, this is not new to you. But think at those of your team that are not experienced as you. Think at junior developers, mid-level developers, and probably even if you're unexperienced developers, there is never a goal that once you reach it, you are the best developer in the world. You can even learn new tricks. So probably this is not that crazy. You know all this stuff, but there is always room to improve yourself as a developer. And you might want to take into account some of these rules. The last thing I want to mention is max parameters. So I've seen lately in one of the developers working in my company using a function that defined 6 parameters, 6 arguments. So it's like A, B, C, D, E, F. Of course, if some of them were optional, it's really tricky to call such function because you might have like string, null, comma, null, 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 and maybe the last parameter, it is defined. It's really hard to deal with such code. So I think, and I have seen that is pretty much a very recognized rule, that anything that has more than 4 parameters is not that good. I think that even jQuery has maximum 4 parameters, where I guess that not more than 2 of them are optionals, because the tricky part in detecting what's the best value is also detect which one are optional, which are mandatory. If you know that the function will always accept 2 mandatory parameters, then it's fine. If both of them might be optionals, then there is a pattern often used, which is to use one parameter that is an object, and that gives you all the flexibility you need. You can have an empty object, an object with 1 property, 10 properties, it doesn't matter. It's always 1 parameter, and then you can deal with it. You can have defaults in your function. You can deal with it very easily. So there were my favorite features. I hope I convinced you to use this tool. This is how you install it, npm install. Once again, very easy. And this is how you can configure it. So I want to parse all the JavaScript file in the scripts folder, And my configuration file is JS-hint-rc, which is the file in the root of the project. It uses the JSON format. You can rely on the configuration, or default configuration. It's up to you. I like to tweak my rules. And this is one possible outcome that you might receive. For example, unnecessary grouping. Well, I can read that. Operator, this function has too many parameters. The cyclomatic complexity is too high. There are a lot of issues. So before saying hello to you and thank you for attending, I want to briefly mention one small other task. Well, as front-end developers, we often deal with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and we are very happy at the end of the day. But our users might not be as us. So might not be sighted persons with good health. Well, I hope you are all in good health. So accessibility is really important. It's really an area where we want to spend more time. Lately, there has been a lot of discussion around the internet about accessibility. I hope that you are taking care of that. And if you are not, please take into account, consider the possibility to spend more time in improving the accessibility of your code base. So accessibility is also one of those areas where, yes, you can automate some checks, but then a manual in-depth testing is definitely needed. But regardless of that, you still want the easy things to be done by a tool, by a software. So the tool I want to present you is, well, the task is Tenant client, which is, again, just a wrapper among Tenant, which is a software released pretty much last year, I guess. And one thing that it does is that it can identify 508 and WCAG 2.0 issues of your project in any environment, which means regardless of where you're running it. One note about Tenant is that unfortunately it costs money. It's not for free, not even for open source projects. It has a 30 days free trial, but when it is expired, you have to spend money. The good thing is that it has an online demo where you can copy and paste a URL and you can have a report generated for you. So this is how you install it. Once again, just npm install. And if you, as I said, this is just a brief mention. If you want to delve more into it, read the grant task page or the documentation. And this is the kind of report that it gives you. So here, as an example, I parsed the Yahoo homepage, and it has just 100 accessibility issues, which is a lot. So, well, probably your project, if it's as big as that one, might have the same kind of issues. So, in conclusion, so mind the musketeers principle. So try to avoid the code in your projects to diverge too much. Try to stick with one code convention because it's easier to maintain, is easier to follow, is easier to reason about. People coming in the later phase of the project will really be happy, will really say thank you to you because they will not go crazy. They will just learn one code convention, one code style, and even more if you're sharing the code style among all the company, unless you have a huge company, that's a win-win because I can just jump on another project. I'm using the same code conventions. So mind it, try to stick with it if you agree with that principle. Both code style and quality matter. So people are usually often concerned just about code quality, but for me, code style matters as well because for the reason I explained so far. So mistakes are unavoidable. Even if you are very experienced, there is always room for improvements for yourself, for others. We are human beings, we are imperfect, mistakes happen at all time. Detecting them manually is boring, is time consuming, you don't want to do that. So use tools on your behalf to detect the issues and where possible, even to fix them, maybe using tools like JSES, as I showed you. So thanks for attending, thank you very much. I don't know, if you have any questions, please ask me. If you are shy, you can reach me later. Otherwise, reach me on Twitter, by email. It's fine, it's the same to you. Sorry, it's the same to me. And thanks very much, this is my contact. Any question? Yeah.
Two questions actually. First is, do you use then automatic fixing during the build process as well? Like automatic linting and fixing the errors during the build process?
Yeah, it's possible.
And do you have encountered any broken code as a result of those fixes?
No, never. Well, I mean, the build can break because the developer, well, what I do usually in the company, the project I run, is that I usually ask, well, I have a grunt task that does watch. When I watch there is a change, I perform JS lint, JS hint plus JSES. So the fixes are made as you write the code, which is cool. And so it's really hard that the issue can reach the build process. It will never reach it. If it reaches the point, it means that you have disabled grunt watch, and I'm gonna watch you next time. So that's the idea. So no, usually it never breaks for this reason. Any other question? Well, in this case, thank you very much.